Good morning. This is welcome to our third party Thursday from Maynard, Costerisan, and this is Caitlin Watts, and obviously I always introduce myself at the beginning of these and welcome everyone to these third party Thursdays. We're always excited to, get all of our information out to our clients. This is a great way for us to do that. On the line, I have Eric from Dominion Systems. He'll go into a little bit more of an introduction of himself, and we are working together for an HR solution for our clients. So, Eric, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Kate. I appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everyone, this morning. I appreciate you taking some time out of your very busy days to go through this presentation on performance reviews. A little bit about Dominion Systems and myself. I have been working in the payroll HR consulting world now for over 26 years with Dominion Systems. Dominion is a Grand Rapids-based business that has been helping folks across the state of Michigan with their payroll, HR, labor, time management needs now for over 50 years. I've been with the company for 26 years myself, and so a lot of what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be discussed centered around the idea of performance reviews and my experience with businesses of all different types of industries and sizes. Now, this webinar, this demonstration, this talk today is about performance reviews, and this was put together primarily just before the COVID-19 crisis hit the state of Michigan in the United States, and where most states are now on lockdown. But a lot of the thoughts and ideas in this presentation are still valid, or even more valid nowadays, as a lot of businesses are still dealing with stay at home, where they have to interact with their employees on a regular basis, possibly with performance. And how does that work when we're not sitting in the same office, or we have to be 6 feet apart from each other? So I'm going to talk to a little bit about the technology about performance reviews, but also the main idea today on performance is, what do they look like nowadays? There's been a real renaissance, I would believe, in the idea of doing performance reviews with employees over the last 4, 5, 6 years. Are they even valid still today? What are the drawbacks? What are ways that our company, depending on what size and what industry, can make the best use of performance reviews? So that's what we're going to be talking today. What are we talking about typically with most of our performance reviews? The model that we're usually using at this point is it's a formal assessment in which managers are evaluating employees' performance. They typically identify strengths and weaknesses. We're offering feedback to employees, and we're trying to set goals for future performance. Now, what we're finding a lot of times with this is that the old model of performance reviews were that they're historically done on an annual basis with a lot of businesses. And usually when they're doing them on a face-to-face basis where they're sitting down with the employee. They're going through some sort of written documentation a lot of times, and they're saying, here's how you did this year in terms of your job responsibilities and achievement of these goals. Here's what you're looking at in terms of development. Here are the things that we thought you might be able to improve upon. Usually for most businesses, they were doing them on an annual basis towards the end of the year, what we're finding. If even that, my experience in the last couple of years talking to a lot of businesses, especially small to medium-sized businesses, is the fact that they don't even do them on an annual basis. It's one of those things that always gets pushed off because there's so many other higher priority type items with the business having to take care of. Normally, when we're talking about performance reviews, the standard model with performance reviews is that they also were related typically to some sort of pay rate increase and or bonuses and or possible promotions. So, and performance reviews have been in existence for a very long time. In my 26 years, I've been talking to businesses about this for a long period of time, and it's always been something that HR, payroll administrators have always needed help with or ways to make better. So typically those are what we're talking about in what I call the traditional methodology. Now, performance reviews have definitely become more important in the last few years. I've especially seen a resurgence in this need, in the want to do these since the end of the Great Recession back from 2007, 2009. When we came out of the Great Recession, there was a ton of unemployment, very similar to what we're going through right now with COVID-19, but on you know, an exponentially smaller scale. As we came out of the Great Recession, what I was finding is businesses were starting to increase in terms of revenue size. And because of the new revenue, because of the new clients, they were dropping to historical lows and having to add more staff. Adding the staff really drove the unemployment rate at the state level and also at the federal level to historic lows. In the state of Michigan, for example, just before COVID-19 hit, our unemployment rate as of February 2020 was 3.1%, which when I was doing research on this was almost at a 20 to 30 year low. If we look at the federal level, we're talking about a 3.5% unemployment rate. What does that mean? Well, Dominion Systems being Grand Rapids based, in the West Michigan group of areas, HR people that I was talking to said, we can't get people in the door to fill open positions. And when we do, it takes a lot of time to get them up to speed and trained. So since we're spending so much time and effort to try to get bodies in to fill open positions, it's so important to maintain and keep the existing employees, especially productive employees, at our organization. So how do we do that? Well, performance reviews, performance analyzation, those type of items become even more important for a business as we have those type of situations. Maintaining existing employees is developing has become the most important thing for a lot of businesses. And of course, this is pre-COVID-19, but like anything else, the COVID-19 crisis will pass, just like the Great Recession eventually passed. And as businesses come out of COVID-19, they're going to need to bring their employees back to full staff, possibly. And that will involve getting new people possibly on board or getting furloughed employees back onto their companies. These needs will not go away. Performance reviews, maintaining these folks, developing employees, those needs will become just as important as they were before, or maybe even more important. But who likes to do performance reviews? You know, in talking with a lot of businesses nowadays, performance reviews are one of those things that was always dreaded. Now, maybe not by the HR payroll administration of a company, but a lot of supervisors that I talk to or come into contact with, they don't like doing performance reviews. And I think that's pretty standard across most businesses that I'm dealing with or talking with. Again, it's done typically at the end of the calendar year. And usually for a lot of businesses, that's not a great time to be doing these. You know, if I'm doing them at the end of the calendar year in December, end of November, a lot of businesses have these wonderful things like called open enrollment for healthcare benefits. That takes a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. We've got holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's. We've got parties. We are wrapping up the end of our fiscal year or calendar year in the accounting department. So the model of doing a lot of these performance reviews at the end of the year at that time of year causes a lot of people a lot of anxiety, causes them to put it on the bottom of the list because there's so many other higher priority things for the business at that point in time. The other thing that I found with a lot of businesses is performance reviews as a whole have always been paper intensive, and typically forms are long because, like I mentioned earlier in the previous slides, there's a lot of things that have to be covered in this annual performance review. We're talking about possible compensation changes. We're talking about achievements. We're talking about development plans. Possibly we're talking about PIP plans in which I'm putting employees on corrective actions, those type of items. So there's a lot of things that have to be covered by a supervisor. And because it gets longer, because of the timing of the year, those things all become takebacks or things that they don't want to do. Another item that really comes up with performance typically is that the HR department constantly has to goad or cajole their supervisors and to get them done in a timely manner because of all these other things that are taking away in terms of their time, approving time cards, working with their people, getting their department goals taken care of. The HR department just becomes a real drain on them because they're having to continually follow up on what supervisors have done the performance reviews for their employees, where are we in process, when will they be done, when will they be looked at by the higher ups, the HR department, executive teams, to make sure the performance reviews are done in a way that benefits not only the company, but also the employees. The last item is supervisors complain that they don't have enough time to do them, question why they're needed. Are these even something that I get a lot of supervisors ask, are they even worth the time and effort? If I'm doing these at home while I'm sitting on the couch because they're due next week, am I really going to see a benefit from this from my employee groups? So Those have been the typical models for performance reviews and the drawbacks or things that I find when I'm talking to folks out there. Are they necessary? Do performance reviews actually, in this day and age with technology out there, even though they've been around for a long time, I've got a lot of businesses that will ask me, do we even have to do these? Are they even relevant anymore? Are they actually making employees better at their jobs? Are we achieving our goals by doing performance reviews? The short answer is yes. The reason I can say that, a recent Gallup poll found that only 14% of employees agree that their reviews inspire them to improve their jobs. Now, what that means is employees don't believe that they're valuable, but it depends on how the performance review is done. In addition, recent surveys have also said that traditional yearly reviews can actually make employee performance a third worse of the time. So while on the cusp of this, on these initial slides, it shows maybe they're not a great idea, long term there are good reasons for doing them. The drawbacks for traditional performance review model: they cost a lot of money for businesses to do. Another reason why some businesses say, we don't like doing these, they're a big pain in our neck for having them done, is because they take a lot of effort. There have been a lot of studies to say that businesses to do performance reviews on an annual basis, a supervisor typically has to sit down and spend anywhere from an hour to 3 hours on each individual employee's performance reviews. The reason they have to do that is they're filling out paperwork. They are putting metrics together in terms of, did you accomplish these type of goals? They might be talking to other employees within the department to get feedback from those employees for peer reviews. They might have to have these performance reviews authorized or reviewed by the higher ups within the department or the HR department. So if we look at things like in terms of actual costs, there's been a lot of studies that said if I'm spending 3 hours for each individual review, if a supervisor's annual hourly rate is anywhere from $30 to $40, $50 an hour with benefits, I'm talking thousands of dollars which are being chewed up in just doing these reviews just on labor from a supervisor. If they have 10, 15, 20, or maybe even more employees that they have to do reviews. The other thing, the drawback to the traditional performance review model, is that they're not actually done enough to actually modify or change behavior. We find for a lot of businesses, I'm doing an annual or twice a year review. A lot of the things that the supervisors bring up during that performance review are things that are historical. I put an employee on a corrective action because they had an attendance issue, or their production within their job was not what it needed to be. Well, that might have been 6 months ago. That might have been 8 months ago. In that situation, that activity, that thing that the employee was doing might have already been corrected. So when I'm doing a 6-month or an annual review, what I find sometimes is I'm just rehashing things that have already been addressed and corrected. And sometimes that rubs employees the wrong way. The other thing too is a lot of times with these reviews, they can be anecdotal due to the infrequency with which we do the reviews. I remember if I'm doing them once a year, once every 6 months, maybe once even a quarter, I'm only remembering a couple items from that employee's activity or what they've been doing, their work history, their experience, and I'm putting them down on a note sheet. And maybe those couple other things, I'm not reaffirming all the good things that they do in day to day. I'm just hitting the high points. And so because it's anecdotal, it's only once a year, twice a year. It's one of those items that the employee doesn't respond well to. Another item is that like I mentioned before, we're trying to cover too many bases at one time. Like anybody else nowadays in an electronic world, I am trying to concentrate on a couple ideas. And if I'm trying to do a review with my supervisor, the supervisor is trying to do a review with the employee, and I'm trying to cover a ton of area. I'm trying to cover development for next year. I'm trying to cover corrective action. I'm trying to get a feel for what the employee feels about the job, their supervisor, the company itself. I'm covering two ground. It's very hard for someone to focus in on one idea and be able to do an action plan and make that idea happen. Last thing, they tend to be one-sided in nature. Because I'm doing performance reviews, I'm doing them only once or twice a year, because I'm trying to cover so much ground, because I'm doing anecdotal. They tend to be one-sided in nature, which means the supervisor is sitting there doing a lot of talking, and then the employee is doing a lot of listening. And at the end, we ask for some feedback, which is a short period of time, sign off here, and I'm off to the next thing as a supervisor. So they tend to be very one-sided in nature. Now, are they really worth doing if they take that much time and cost that much? There are some interesting stats here that give it a big yes. They are worth it if you consider the following facts. The cost to replace an employee, according to SHRM, is between 90 and 200% of their annual salary. So if I've got an employee, especially prior to COVID-19, where we're in a tight job environment, tight employment environment, employees are moving because they could possibly go down the street and make an extra 5 or 10% of their annual salary. To replace that person, if I would have known about it, if we would have been keeping them in the loop with a performance review on a more frequent basis, that's very expensive. If I'm talking about an average mid-level employee that's making $30,000 to $40,000 a year, performance reviews can be very cost-effective for a business, because if I don't do them and I have a lot of turnover, especially in key positions or with key employees, it's very expensive. The other thing that's very important is that prior to COVID-19, the job market was primarily on the backs of employees, not employers. I'm trying to get new employees in the door. Talking to a lot of HR managers, they were saying, listen, if I can get somebody that can breathe and chew gum, I'm going to give them an opportunity to work here at our business because we need warm bodies. Well, that's borne out with the Work Institute study recently that said 41.4 million U.S. employees left their jobs voluntarily in 2018. In 2019, that number was going up even more. Based on the work study, it said basically the increase in voluntary quits could get as high as 35% turnover by 2023. So if I think about my organization, if I've got 100 employees, 35% of them, 35 of them would voluntarily quit during the course of the year. What can I do to minimize that kind of turnover, especially with folks that are key to my business or are highly productive employees? The other thing that's very important about why performance reviews can be very beneficial and why it's an important yes on this is it can take 1 to 2 years before a new employee is fully productive as an existing employee, according to Training Industry Quarterly. Even if I have someone that walks out the door and I have a great candidate that makes it all the way through the interview process and onboarding, it might not just take me 90 days to get them up to speed. A lot of industry surveys and studies have said that if I bring a new employee aboard, it can take up to 2 years before that person is fully replacing an existing productive employee within my organization. So these 3 points are very important as to why performance reviews with businesses are very important to maintain and to continue to make our unemployment, our turnover rate within our company push down as much as possible. The other big item with are they worth doing? A lot of businesses now are doing succession planning. Performance reviews deal with that quite a bit. I'm trying to groom productive employees to possibly move up within our organization. Entry-level employee or team member on my cell might want to be a team lead, might eventually be groomed to be a manager of that department. These performance reviews that I might do with these employees deal a lot with succession. If I don't do performance reviews, my succession planning can be very hit or miss. And for some companies in key positions, if I guess wrongly on an employee or that employee unexpectedly quits, it could have a real detrimental effect for my company and set us back months, possibly years in terms of our goals. All right. When I get down to performance reviews, how can I make them better? We've talked a lot about different types of items here where there are potential drawbacks, standard models, what people don't like about them. The biggest keys that I would take away here are make performance reviews more frequent than once or twice a year. Now, with that being said, the normal inclination is, whoa, they're taking a lot of time to do right now, so you're asking me to take even more time. The studies that we have found that if we do them more frequently, they can be a lot shorter, a lot more simplified. Okay, so if I make performance reviews, there's a big trend nowadays to do performance reviews or what I call checkups from the neck-ups with employees on a more frequent basis, on either a quarterly basis, a monthly basis, or in some of my organizations I work with, they even do weekly reviews with their employees. Now, with that being said, they're not sitting down with employees on a weekly basis to go over something for an hour, hour and a half. They're doing something on a more simplified basis where they're taking 5, 10, 15 minutes tops to go through a specific point that they're targeting with the employee. By making these more frequent, we're having conversations between the employer and manager about work expectations, progress, and development. By making these more frequent, we're also doing is we're encouraging honest feedback from both the employer and the manager. So what we're doing there is if I'm making this more frequent, I'm having a shorter conversation. These shorter conversations don't cover a lot of topics. They're covering 1 to 2 topics. And what we're trying to do is make them more conversational. If I can make them more conversational as opposed to an annual review that's done in December for a business, I can elicit better feedback from the employee. I can also, by having a more conversational tone during these performance reviews, I can be able to be honest and more transparent on both the employee level and also the supervisor level. So if I'm doing this on a more frequent basis, if Bob here is working in my department and Bob really isn't a good fit, instead of waiting to the end of the year to try to figure out, hey, Bob, you're not a good fit for this. If I'm having these little weekly, monthly performance reviews with Bob, I can have a more honest conversation and get his feedback about, hey, do you really like working in this department? Is this job even a good fit for you? By doing those on a more frequent basis, I can eliminate expense on having somebody that might not work out within my department. And also, I can eliminate surprises. I've had a lot of organizations where they say, you know, we do an annual review, performance review with an employee, and some of those result in a termination. Really? And then have an employee be surprised that they're getting terminated. By doing performance reviews on a more frequent basis, getting them scheduled on a quarterly, monthly, or even weekly basis, it allows you to change direction with an employee ever so slightly. So I can get them on a corrective action quicker. If it's not working out, we can eliminate the additional expense of having this person on the payroll, having them at the company for another 9 months, as opposed to cutting ties with them relatively quickly. Another way to make performance reviews better for businesses is to actually simplify the performance review itself. With more frequent meetings, reviews can actually be shorter and simplified. Separate functions. What I'm seeing a lot nowadays with businesses is you say, if we are trying to take our standard performance review, which covers possibly compensation, it accomplishes achievements within the job. It is also supposed to accomplish developmental planning and possibly succession planning or promotion with the employees. What they're doing is taking those 4 functions that would normally be wrapped up into one meeting and splitting them up and then setting specific times throughout the course of the year with which we'll discuss that. For example, if I was a business that was doing it on a monthly basis, I might target January as being the review that I'm going to do with an employee that discusses compensation, or December. And then what I'm going to do is schedule out throughout the course of the year that's once a month on this month's February, and then we're going to talk about it again in May, and then we're also going to talk about it again in September, is what we're going to talk about your achievements within the job at that period of time. Whereas throughout the other parts of the months, these are the months that we're going to dictate are going to be covered with actual training, the things that you need to do. Twice a year, we're going to discuss ideas about how do you like working at the position? Do you want to continue working here? What are the abilities for you to advance higher up within the organization? By breaking these all out, it allows a supervisor to specifically target 1 or 2 ideas, have a short meeting, get good dialogue, good feedback from the employee, talk to them in a truthful, transparent way about what they need to do better at their job. By doing these, again, elicit genuine dialogue, get input from employees. We're not talking, it's so much one-sided. Other ways we can make performance reviews better. One of the biggest areas that I found with businesses is a lot of supervisors, they're managing a department, and we give them all the tools to get the department goals, the work done. But one of the biggest areas that are always a deficiency with supervisors is we have not done any formal training with supervisors on how to do performance reviews. A lot of organizations that I go in and talk to is, well, we give them a form. The supervisor fills out that form once a year, twice a year. It gets reviewed by the HR department or the supervisor's direct supervisor above them, and then that's it. But we've never actually sat down to do training with supervisors and how they do performance reviews on a regular basis, if it's annual, quarterly, monthly, every week, whatever. And so what I find is very important for a lot of businesses. If I don't train a supervisor on how to do a performance review, how can I expect them to get the results that we're looking at? So one of the biggest areas to make performance reviews a lot better for businesses is to train supervisors in a couple different areas on a performance review. For example, supervisors should know exactly what the end result of a review should be. When I go into a review with an employee, I should know before going to that review, what is the goal at the end of the review? What do I want to get from the employee? Do I want them to get buy-in on the idea that they could be a team lead or potentially an assistant manager within our organization? Am I trying them to get a buy-in on a corrective action because we've had issues with attendance, insubordination, or non-productivity or not up to the level of productivity that we're expecting? Is the end result that I want this person to let me know about any issues that they're having at their job that would make them happier and a better employee? It's important for supervisors to know when I go into a performance review, this is what I want to see at the very end. Okay, so a lot of supervisors just sort of go into a review and say, okay, we're going to go through this, and they're not sure exactly what's going to happen at the end. Okay, so that's an important training component of supervisors. Supervisors should role play how their meetings should go. I've got a lot of organizations that they will either have webinars, classes, sit-down classes with their supervisors with the HR department to say, hey, let's role play through a performance review to see, I'm going to throw things at you. What happens if the employee becomes irate about something that you said? How do you handle that so it doesn't escalate? What happens if you're having a supervisor review with an employee and they up and quit? How do I take care of that? What if I'm going to terminate an employee as a result of this review? How do I do that in a methodology that minimizes impact to the business? So role playing with different scenarios. If you're a large enough organization that can maintain that through video library that a supervisor can review, maybe it's one-on-one training with the HR department, maybe it's one-on-one training with their direct supervisor, those are recommended. It's important also that supervisors, when they go into review, that they're trained to do specific comments, specific feedback, so we don't run into liability potential issues. Obviously, a lot of businesses will review performances from supervisors, but we should also train the supervisor in different types of language that they should use in performance reviews. Engage the employee to get their feedback, especially if there's a conflict. You know, if I go into a review, I should be training a supervisor so you know that when I hit this part of the review, it might cause the employee to become irate or upset. How do we handle that to diffuse the situation and also get the result that we're looking at? I want them to get buy-in that if they're having issues, for example, with attendance, what can we do, Mr. Employee, to get your attendance better? Is there some sort of underlying issue there that we're not aware of? Okay. And then the other important training component of doing reviews with businesses is follow up with the employee after the review. A lot of businesses nowadays, I do the review and that's it. Where if I'm trying to do these performance reviews with employees on a more regular basis, it's critical to do a follow-up within a few days, no more than a week from the initial review, to just touch base with items, especially if there's something that I want the employee to have a direct response back, like, hey, remember we talked about this corrective action that I put you on. I want to see some follow-up in terms of correcting these attendance issues, correcting these conflict issues, these type of items. Having constant follow-up with the employee after the review, again, takes it from a review type classification to a conversation. And what am I trying to do with this employee to get them to be more productive and get them on the pathways that I want them to be at? Another way to make performance reviews better, take advantage of technology to aid the supervisor in doing performance reviews. There are a lot of tools out there nowadays for businesses to get away from a paper-intensive review process. Those tools can be a lot of different things. Electronic tools through companies like, payroll services, HR services, things along those lines. If you're not employing those right now, that'd be something that I would suggest you take a look at. And there's a lot of different ways that businesses can be helped out. So it's not only the technology of doing something with a performance review, there are also things that are becoming more and more prevalent in this day and age. One of the things that I'm running into a lot of businesses is employee self-evaluations. If your company is not doing employee self-evaluation, it might be something you want to look at. The nice thing about employee self-evaluations, it's not one-sided. I give the evaluation of the supervisor about that employee. I give the employee their own self-evaluation, and then we meet in the middle to discuss during the review to see, are we on the same page together? Do we have disconnects here, and where are those disconnects, and how much of a disconnect is there? Employee self-evaluations, what are also very great about doing those if you don't employ them right now, is employee self-evaluations allow a supervisor to give the review to the employee before the actual meeting to give them an idea of what's important, what we are covering. If we're giving the employee knowledge about this, they are better forewarned about what the importance of the review, what we're going to go over in details would be for the employee and the supervisor. Another thing that's becoming very important for businesses is what we call 360-year peer reviews. In a lot of businesses, what we run into is supervisor says this about the employee. Well, it's important that if the employee is having a conflict and doesn't agree with it, I can support as a supervisor. I'm not just your boss and telling you it should be this way. Within our department of 10 people, there are 2 other people that when I queried them about your performance, this is what they also said. So I'm building up ammunition. I'm building up reasons to support my ideas that I'm presenting back to the employee. Another thing that's very important, take advantage of the technology out there with performance review models or products, is that they should be automatic. Be able to schedule an automatic review for employees and supervisors, so it's not something that the HR department necessarily has to do themselves. Systems are out there nowadays that can set up that it will query the employee through an email or a text, let them know that they have a self-evaluation. At the very least, notify the supervisor if there's an evaluation coming up. Here is the form. It's electronic. Fill it out as you need to. There's a lot of systems out there nowadays that even have weighting, scoring that help with merit increases tied into reviews. So if you're not utilizing those type of tools right now, something to look at potentially, especially in this day and age. Cloud-based, the last thing I would talk about is, nowadays, COVID-19, the crisis that we're currently going through, businesses, if I can make performance reviews, do some sort of electronic product that simplifies supervisors' life, and is also cloud-based, it allows me to share these and engage with employees while not necessarily being within the same room with them. Eventually, we'll come out of COVID-19, but even after coming out of COVID-19, we're probably going to have some social distancing components that will become more of a way of life. Cloud-based performance review products, doing this electronically, allow supervisors to maintain that contact with the employee, get them to the pathway that we want them to be on, but also not jeopardize anybody's health. So, well, I tell you what, I appreciate everybody for staying on the demonstration, listening to my presentation. If you have any further questions down the road, please don't hesitate to get in contact with Kate and she can supply my information too if they want some direct contact. Have a great rest of the day, folks.
Thank you.